The Expressionist movement started in Germany in the early 1900s. This movement was influenced partially by other art movements such as Fauvism, whose art focused on using bright colors, but typically only to express joy and positive feelings. Expressionists wanted to express many emotions through their work, such as anxiety, anger, or peacefulness. Expressionist artists made art through painting, sketching, woodcut, printing, and even films. Although techniques used in Expressionist art were not completely new ideas, this was the first time that this type of art was given a name. Vincent van Gogh had already done a lot of this with his art and was an inspiration to many Expressionist artists who were just starting out. This type of art actually started in France, but the Expressionist movement itself started in Germany. Some of the characteristics of Expressionism include bright colors, bold and quick brushstrokes, a display or expression of intense emotions, and subjectivity. When this movement started out, many Germans didn't understand the use of bright colors and odd shapes. They thought of this art as being too French, and they didn't like it. Expressionist art always displayed much emotion, but how to interpret the meaning of the art was always unclear. This showed people that art could be expressed in odd ways and didn't always have to have a clear meaning. This was a big change in art that many had trouble taking in. Expressionists wanted to start this movement to express many beliefs they had about the world around them, how they wanted things to change, and their feelings behind these things. One big thing they wanted to change was living in a society with social classes. They wanted everyone to be equal, and they believed that this could be achieved through artistic awareness. They exposed themes such as death, madness, poverty, and oppression among the disadvantaged in society. Many Expressionists also used Sigmund Freud's principle of the unconscious through their art as a way to confront their inner unknown. They painted to release their dissatisfaction with themselves, dissatisfaction with the world around them, and their deep feelings of sadness. Van Gogh is one very well-known artist who did this.
Born in 1853 in Holland, Van Gogh was brought up in a religious environment, and he was the son of a pastor. Van Gogh was highly emotional and lacked self-confidence, and as his art career began to take off, he had 2 unsuccessful relationships, but was determined to pursue art, for it brought him happiness, and color was the source of expression for Van Gogh. Van Gogh, over time, began to lighten his palette, but ironically fell into fits of depression and lucidity, and ultimately committed suicide.
In a letter written to his brother shortly before his death, Van Gogh mentioned that because he didn't have any children, he saw his art as his progeny. Van Gogh's legacy includes over 2,100 works of art. Van Gogh completed his 1,300 drawings, sketches, and prints, and 860 oil paintings in a little over 10 years, finishing most of them in the last 2 years of his life. Van Gogh's work has since influenced artists such as Francis Bacon and Jackson Pollock, as well as movements like Fauvism and abstract expressionism.
One of Van Gogh's more famous works of art is a painting called Starry Night over the Rhone. In 1888, Van Gogh wrote a personal letter to Eugene Bach, a friend of his, describing the painting. As any artist would, Van Gogh describes the painting in no less than a dozen colors, and he also describes 2 colorful figurines of lovers and leaves the rest up for interpretation. Van Gogh, in this painting in particular, is interested in painting nature as it is and leaves little emotion in the painting, which is a little unlike Expressionism. Starry Night over the Rhone is not the only starry painting that Van Gogh created. In Starry Night, Van Gogh's second Starry Night painting, the sky's movement keeps the viewer's eyes entertained as they watch the swirls in the sky go by. There is a small town below the sky featuring a church, which may lead to people interpreting the painting in a religious way. And it is believed to be inspired by Genesis 37:9, which says, "Lo, I have still had another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." In Van Gogh's painting, he depicts 11 stars in the sky. Unlike Starry Night over the Rhone, there are no people, leaving the viewer to feel a sense of isolation or even peace while viewing such a magnificent scene. And this could be attributed to the fact that while Van Gogh was painting Starry Night, he was in an asylum in 1888.
Here is a cool video clip to show the motion in this painting as previously mentioned, and also to show you in general how an expressionist might look at his work.
Gogh's first major work of art was an oil painting called Potato Eaters, painted in 1855. Van Gogh was just getting used to the brushes, and his goal was really to just paint an entirely normal piece of art, and also to gain the appreciation of his fellow artists. But because of his lack of experience, Van Gogh's subjects, if you will, ended up with shadow-casted faces, warped by the overdone darkness. Alas, the final product of his ever-so-planned painting was not what he had set in his mind to do, and was not a success until after his death. But, as with all great figures of history, what was once doomed a mistake is now highly regarded as a masterpiece, and is a main target for art thieves. Although Van Gogh's intention was not to paint his subjects in as drastic of a way as he did, his goal was to paint the peasants as they were. This is a common theme not only in Van Gogh's work, but also in the works of many other expressionists. The dark lighting, rough brushstrokes, and unsettling subject matter, the Potato Eaters can be considered very expressionist. Although Potato Eaters did not meet Van Gogh's ambitions, over time he began to consider it one of his best works of art.
Born to wealthy parents in 1866, Kandinsky showed a great love and appreciation for sound, color, and words. As a child, he was given private drawing lessons as well as music lessons, but did not develop an interest in painting until age 30. To Kandinsky, painting was a deeply emotional and spiritual task, and both Mark and Kandinsky were influenced by symbolism as well as theosophy. Mark and Kandinsky believed the artist to be a prophet who could communicate the divine to the world. Kandinsky, like other expressionists, sought to convey universal emotions and ideas through his paintings. After suffering a nervous breakdown after a failed relationship with an art student, Kandinsky turned away from naturalism by focusing on the inner and the outer. The inner refers to the artist's concentration on finding forms to evoke collective experiences. Murnau, Street with Women, depicts a German village with its sweeping brushstrokes and expressive color, and is a true example of the expressionist style. Compositions, another term commonly used by Kandinsky, referred to geometric shapes that were planned and ordered into place. Improvisations, as its name implies, refers to a style that required approaching the canvas with no plan or intended theme. Black Lines, a painting by Kandinsky, is a non-objective painting blending both calmness from the circles and the chaos of color into the same picture. The vibrant colors and quick movements of the objects give the painting life in an expressionistic tone. Like other expressionist artists, Kandinsky used color to express his emotions rather than describe the scene. In fact, in some of Kandinsky's works, subjects were eliminated completely. Kandinsky's methods led to the use of methods commonly used by surrealists and has paved the way for abstract expressionism.
Although Beckmann is classified as an expressionist, he both rejected the term and the movement. His work is characterized by his vibrant use of color and a profoundly philosophical outlook. The painting you see here is called His Great Death Scene, which is a painting influenced by Munch and reflects the death of Beckmann's mother. An interesting fact about Beckmann is that his work was banned by Hitler. However, even though his work was banned, he still continued to paint and create marvelous art pieces in secret. He produced over 800 paintings between 1905 and 1950. However, his style and subjects changed after he served as a medical volunteer in World War I. His art focuses on human and suffering. This is one of Beckmann's self-portraits. As you can see, he dealt a lot with human pain and suffering. This is shown in the agony of his face and the dark shading. There are no colors, and the tension is clear in his face. For an artist so well known for his vibrant use of color, it may seem a little odd for him to create something so colorless and dull. However, after his mother passed away, Beckmann slipped into a deep depression. This can explain the reason for this drastic change in mood. Franz Marc was a German landscape painter best known for his images of animals. In fact, he made money giving animal anatomy lessons to artists. One of his most well-known works came from a book called Sketchbook from the Field, which he produced during World War I after he enlisted. He was also co-founder of the Blue Rider, which is a group of artists who showed off artwork together from 1911 to 1914. The first exhibition of the Blue Rider was given from 1911 to 1912. This art piece by Franz Marc is an oil painting on canvas. The painting's name is Three Animals, Dog, Cat, and Fox. It was created in 1912. This, like many of his other paintings, is of animals. There is a great fluidity in his paintings as seen here. You can see that he paid more attention to the animals rather than the background, because the background is of nothing specific and very generic. It is made up of shades that complement the animals rather than a specific and recognizable backdrop, such as a forest or a desert. Nold is considered one of the great oil painters and watercolor painters of the 20th century. He is best known for his vigorous artwork and his expressive choice of colors. His watercolors include vivid, brooding stormscapes and brilliant florals, as you can see in this picture here. Golden yellows and deep reds appear frequently in his work, giving a luminous quality to otherwise somber tones. His intense preoccupation with the subject of flowers reflects his continuing art interest in the artist of Van Gogh. An interesting fact about him is that he was rejected by one of the most prestigious and well-known academies of fine arts in 1898. He was a supporter of the Nazi Party from the early 1920s, having become a member of its Danish section. He expressed negative opinions about Jewish artists and considered Expressionism to be a distinctly Germanic style. The Nazis confiscated 1,052 works, which is more than from any other artists. He was prohibited by the Nazis from painting in 1941, but continued to secretly work in watercolor. This Emil Nold painting is titled Poppies. This is an example of his intense preoccupation of flowers and his vibrant use of color. You can also see the beautiful and calming choice of colors that give a luminous quality. The outlines of the colors aren't sharp, making it appear unrealistic while still being recognizable, which demonstrates one of the characteristics of Expressionism. Nold has created dozens of poppies, and all of them share similar color palettes and faded outlines.
Born in 1880, Kirchner grew up with a love for sketching and watercolor painting. He painted or sketched anything that seemed new and mysterious to him. His father collected every work of art he created and showed it to others. Many people told him that he would be an artist someday. In 1901, Kirchner went to college in Dresden to study architecture, where he soon became friends with Fritz Bleuel, who also had a love for painting and drawing. A couple of years later, they ended up joining together with two others, Erich Heckel and Carl Schmidt, to found the group called Die Brücke. In this group, they taught themselves to paint, sketch, and do printmaking. They agreed to only share their works of art as a group and not individually. Their works focused on city and landscapes, the human figure, and the nudes, often painted in an outdoor setting. Their art studio's walls were covered in their art pieces, and even all of its furniture was created by them. Their group, however, did not last and eventually broke up. Kirchner made many pieces while in this group, but also produced many of his own. This first painting by Kirchner is called Playing Naked People. The first thing people may notice when looking at this painting is its bright colors of orange, red, blue, and green, which is one of the main characteristics of Expressionism. People might also immediately notice that the meaning behind this painting is most likely sexual, considering the fact that the title of this piece is Playing Naked People. All of the people in this painting are nude. Also, there is a clear chemistry or connectedness between the two people standing over on the right. The emotion in this painting is almost completely different on each side. On the left, there's a lot of movement going on, which is shown in the arch of the body from one of the two people and the crouching down of the other. This side of the painting is almost celebratory with its movement and bright colors. The right side, however, comes off as being very isolated and private. The two people are so focused on each other and they are off in their own world. This side also comes off as much more calm than the left, with its cool, calm colors of mostly green and blue. It's hard to know the exact meaning of this painting and to know what is going on. It is subjective and also displays the technique of quick brushstrokes, both of which are main characteristics of Expressionism. The second painting by Kirchner is called Female Artist. This painting displays very deep, intense emotion. There is a white cat sitting next to this woman on the couch keeping her company, but it seems to have no effect on her emotions, showing that they are probably very deep and intense. One would assume right away by looking at this that the woman sitting on the couch is probably depressed. But then the bright colors of yellow, blue, and red and the clothes that she is wearing catches your eye. It is almost a distraction from the dark emotions that could be in this, and changes the assumption of emotion to being apathy and loneliness, rather than deep depression. From the redness shown on her face, you could assume that she has either been crying, or could be experiencing feelings of shame or anxiety. There are also 4 bottles sitting over by the window that most people would probably assume to be bottles of alcohol. This adds to the assumption that she could be apathetic and lonely and using alcohol to numb these emotions. This painting could be a reflection of Kirchner's emotions himself. He experienced the death of a close friend and mentor, and when he went to receive treatment, he never really allowed people to help him recover. Kirchner occasionally experienced pain and paralysis of his limbs, which was probably also a very rough thing to go through. The bright colors in this emotion-filled piece could be a way to symbolize that art is something that helped Kirchner get through the rough points in life and helped make the dark times a bit brighter. Edvard Munch had a very rough childhood. His mother passed away of tuberculosis in 1868, and his favorite sister also passed away 9 years later. Munch spent much of his time being ill and often stayed home from school because of it. He would receive tutoring from his aunt and schoolmates, and would spend the rest of his time drawing to keep himself busy. Munch moved around a lot because of his father. His father was extremely religious and had very high expectations of him that drove him to the point of madness. His father would try to scare his kids by saying that their mother was looking down on them, grieving over their misbehavior. His father was always very disappointed in him, no matter what he did. But when Munch decided he wanted to become a painter, and his father disapproved, he decided to continue on anyways. He analyzed the inner turmoil, conflicts, and extreme states of awareness, and expressed them through his paintings. This first work of art by Edvard Munch is the very famous and well-known painting, The Scream. Munch was actually known as a symbolist, but The Scream is known as an expressionist work of art. This piece has 4 different color versions, 2 of which are pastels and the other 2 are paintings. This painting actually was supposed to be part of a series called The Frieze of Life that consisted of 3 themes: love, death, and anxiety. As you can see, this painting has very bright colors of orange and blue to express its emotion. The main person in the center of this painting is clearly experiencing extreme feelings of terror, anxiety, or surprise. As you can see in the way that she uses both of her hands to hold the sides of her face, displaying an extreme expression of terror. This person is so overwhelmed by whatever is going on that they have to stop in place to catch their breath. You can see in the stance of this person that they have no intention of moving from where they are for the next couple of seconds because they are so emotionally paralyzed. It is said that the inspiration to create this work of art came to Munch as he was walking with some friends down a road at sunset when he stopped to look at the sky in front of him. As his friends walked on, he continued to stay back and stare at the sky and felt fatigued and an intense amount of fear as suddenly the sky turned blood red. This can be taken as a very intense way to look at this situation, which can give us the assumption that Munch used his art as a way to release these intense inner thoughts and emotions. This painting displays very quick brush strokes, adding a visible motion to it as you look at it, and adding even more emotion to the painting as a whole. This second painting, called Melancholy, has been made in several different versions, including darker versions, woodcut versions, pastel versions, and multiple painted versions. The title of this painting is the main emotion that is very clearly expressed within it. The main man in this, that is over on the right, sitting with his face rested on his hand, looks very sad. He is sitting on what I would assume to be rocks surrounding him, next to the shoreline, looking very isolated. He seems to be looking out into the water, contemplating something. I take the water to be a symbolization of emotion, and the dock in the background, leading to a boat at the end of it, a symbolization of a guide or pathway to going forward in life. The people on this deck in the background look like they have their life figured out and like they know where they are going. The main guy on the right of this painting, however, looks very stuck and confused with his life. The colors around him are colorful, but definitely not bright. The loops of color around him are most likely rocks, but it is confusing and kind of hard to figure out, probably much like the thoughts in his head and the emotions that he is experiencing. The video I'm about to play is a long YouTube video on Expressionist films that will hopefully make this lecture a bit more interesting.
A penguin is a bird that cannot fly. I am a man. We will snatch them, carry them into the sewer, and toss them into a deep, dark, watery grave. Tragic irony or poetic justice? You tell me.
Recently, I sat down and watched one of my favorite movies, 1992's Batman Returns, directed by Tim Burton. Now, I had seen this film numerous times, and until this moment, I love Batman Returns for the same reasons that I love most of Tim Burton's other films. It's eerie, creepy, unsettling, and dark. However, this time, as I watched the notorious Penguin, played by Danny DeVito, I noticed something that could only be attributed to my newfound interest in film history. For 3 months prior, I had been studying and researching the development of motion picture, and I discovered a very intriguing detail. You see, Tim Burton's Penguin was presented in an oddly similar way to Robert Vina's Dr. Caligari. Vina's film, created a mere 73 years before Burton's in 1919, was called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It was a silent film, part of the German Expressionist movement of cinema, and by God, it was influential. German Expressionism was born of a desire to be different in Europe. At the dawn of the 1920s, German filmmakers aspired to break away from European and Hollywood norms, and filmmakers like Robert Vina, F.W. Murnau, and Fritz Lang spawned a series of films that would have a lasting influence on the future of movie making. The most noticeable and defining characteristics of the German Expressionist movement were biomechanical acting, theatrical two-dimensional sets, high contrast lighting, distorted shadows and silhouettes, the use of continuity editing and shot transitions, the use of fantasy or horror narratives, and frame stories or settings in the past. In 1922, German director F.W. Murnau directed the world-renowned film Nosferatu. Here, we can see the heavy use of biomechanical acting, high contrast lighting and shadows, and a clear horror narrative. As I mentioned before, Robert Wiener's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, made in 1919, laid the foundation for the movement. Displaying its fantastical, horror-style mise-en-scène, theatrical sets, and high-contrast lighting, Dr. Caligari would later be a direct inspiration to the antagonist in Batman Returns. The German Expressionist movement was short-lived, dying out by the dawn of the 1930s. The last great Expressionist film was arguably Fritz Lang's 1927 effort, Metropolis. Metropolis was less mythical, but it did emphasize a fantasy narrative, and it focused on two-dimensional sets and biomechanical acting. Though this movement was transient, its effects would be profound and continue to have an impact on films made even today.
We'll be on the street soon, Charlie. Another 10 minutes.
German Expressionism's most obvious lasting influence is seen through the effective use of shadows and high-contrast lighting. Legendary filmmakers such as Orson Welles, Alfred Hitchcock, Howard Hawks, and Stanley Kubrick instituted this vestige of Expressionism.
This paper besides pictures and print. I've got to make the New York Enquirer as important to New York as the gas in that light.
What are you going to do, Charlie?
In his 1941 masterpiece, Citizen Kane, Orson Welles utilized expressionist mise-en-scène, shadows, and high-contrast lighting. In the famous projector scene, the use of shadows is blatant.
It's a good shot, Thompson, but what it needs is an angle. All we saw on that screen was that Charles Foster Kane is dead. I know that. I read the paper. You see, Thompson, it isn't enough to tell us what a man did. You've got to tell us who he was. Needs that angle. Wait a minute. What were Kane's last words?
Famed director Alfred Hitchcock consistently used high-contrast lighting, a harkening back to expressionist tendencies. In his female Gothic film of 1940, Rebecca, Hitchcock also used expressionist mise-en-scène along with his shadows. His 1960 masterpiece Psycho pays homage to the silhouettes used in films like Murnau's Nosferatu. Expressionism directly influenced genres as well. The horror, gothic, and film noir genres emerged through the influence of Expressionism. Howard Hawks' 1946 film noir, The Big Sleep, represents a consummate example of Expressionist legacy, using shadows and high-contrast lighting.
Calm and away from a lot of things. They have places for that. Maybe they can cure it. It's been done before.
Why should you build such a thing?
There were those of us who fought against it, but in the end we could not keep up with the expense involved.
Also employing Expressionist techniques was filmmaking legend Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick's 1964 comedy, Dr. Strangelove, used techniques similar to those of Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock.
Mr. President, the technology required is easily within the means of even the smallest nuclear power. It requires only the will to do so.
German Expressionism was relatively unknown during its beginnings in the 1920s. Film historian Thomas Elsaesser notes that Expressionism was not the staple of German cinema, rather a small movement. However, its characteristics were employed by renowned filmmakers like Hitchcock and Kubrick, and this led to its adaptation by more contemporary directors. The 1980s produced more Expressionist-influenced filmmakers. David Lynch's 1980 film, The Elephant Man, uses the same styles of lighting and shadows we had seen before, but Lynch also reinstitutes the method of using a narrative shrouded in horror and ambiguity.
I am not an animal! I am a human being!
Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, made in 1982, follows suit, this time set in the distant future. Woody Allen's 1991 film Shadows and Fog, the acclaimed filmmaker pays direct homage to the Expressionist movement, utilizing some of the same key aspects seen from the films of Wells, Hitchcock, Hawks, and Kubrick.
I'm coming!
Kleinman, come on!
What?
For God's sake, Kleinman, are you deaf?
What do you mean, deaf? What's going on?
We need you to get dressed.
What do you get dressed? Why?
Don't play ignorant.
I was playing ignorant. I was in a deep sleep.
We expect the killer to strike again tonight.
The killer? What killer?
The strangler.
What's strangler?
The maniac, the one who killed Eisler's son and choked Jensen to death with the piano wire.
Jensen, the big night watchman?
That's right.
But perhaps the best, most well-known, and most contemporary example of the influence of German Expressionism is a man who at the dawn of the 1980s was an animator for Walt Disney Studios. In 1982, Tim Burton wrote and directed Vincent, an independent animated short film that most closely resembles the early examples of German Expressionism. He uses high contrast lighting, expressionist mise-en-scène, and a horror narrative to tell the tale of his protagonist. Burton continued to display his expressionist style with Edward Scissorhands, The Nightmare Before Christmas,
Oh, somewhere deep inside of these bones, an emptiness began to grow.
Ed Wood,
Pull the string! Pull the string!
and Sleepy Hollow.
The heads are gone?
Taken by the headless horseman.
Tim Burton is perhaps the most closely affiliated with this historic cinematic movement. Expressionism's impact upon his films is potent and seemingly enjoyable to audiences, as he is one of Hollywood's most box office friendly filmmakers as of today. Through the examination of German Expressionism, a film movement born in Germany by filmmaking outcasts who dared to challenge the status quo of Hollywood, it is easily distinguishable that this movement inspired some of the most important and significant films in the contemporary cinema era. From Robert Wiener to Alfred Hitchcock and Tim Burton, the lasting impact of this movement is clear. Expressionism continues to make its presence known in film, whether through the subtle art of lighting or obvious homages through mise-en-scène. One thing about Expressionism is certain, that this movement, though small during its inception, possesses bounds of influence on some of film's most important modern directors.
From watching this video, you have learned that Expressionist films consisted of characteristics such as dark shadows, high contrast lighting, and oftentimes had a horror narrative. Much emotion was expressed through these films and had a huge impact on how films are made today. Some Expressionist films you may know of are Psycho, Nosferatu, which you may remember being briefly mentioned on the Hashling Slasher episode of SpongeBob, and The Nightmare Before Christmas.